Hello, everyone. Decided to try something new here with recording kind of like a raw, footage take reaction to the big announcement of the 9.15 QOL changes that Blizzard just posted for the upcoming patch. Usually I, kind of do like a big scripted video and it takes a while. But I find often people come in and they, want my thoughts just like they do with a lot of other content creators, want their thoughts on things. Hey, did you talk about this? Do you have a video anywhere? So here we are. Just to talk about everything that they put forth, because there's definitely some big changes and a lot of talk in the heat about the subject right now. I think the biggest thing too is as I digest a lot of the info and see what people say in the community, thoughts sometimes tend to change a bit, but I did want to just record this now to kind of get the initial thoughts out there. So what is the news? The news is that they finally announced that 9.1.5 PTR would be coming soon, and in it are a ton of quality of life changes and accessibility changes that people have been asking for a very long time, since since Shadowlands beta. So there's a couple here that you can see on the screen. So the three main points that they presented, and there's a couple more now that they've kind of teased and highlighted as things to look forward to, but let's start with it. Once you've reached a high renown threshold, you will thereafter be able to freely switch amongst any of your 4 covenants without cooldown or restrictions, as well as use cosmetic rewards that you have learned from one covenant, even if you are currently a member of a different one. Both the covenant switching and the use of cosmetics rewards will also apply to alts once the renown threshold is reached on one character. Long story short, for the memes, they pulled the ripcord. They did what a lot of people have been complaining about for a long time, wanting it to be this way. Free, unlimited, no time gated, no work required swaps to covenants of your choice whenever you want. This is obviously a really nice change. It's been desired for ages. It's great for people who swap between PvP and plus, raid all the time. So obviously a great change, right? Next point, Conduit energy is being removed. End of story. Another great change. It's a system that never really served its purpose. It never really saw like the reason for it to be there. A lot of people hated it, and most people that didn't hate it were just kind of neutral about it because it didn't affect them, me being one of them, right? You just kind of set it and forget it. Once in a while, it's an inconvenience, maybe if you want to swap specs, like, what I had to do for PvP before Race to World First kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, you swap to ret, and, it's annoying for that bit. But there's a lot of people that constantly struggle with that, so great change. And then one last one here, when playing alternate characters, if you've already completed a given Covenant's campaign on a different character, you will be immediately able to earn the Renown and Third Soulbind unlock without needing to replay the full narrative arc. So, again, great for alts, nice boost. A couple of things that also came to light after this big blue post was something else people have been asking about. Maw introduction, finally skippable on alts. So that's another thing. And then they also mentioned that there's going to be, as like kind of their preview coming up for 9.1.5 PTR, they mentioned that there's going to be legendary recycling, which is good. And obviously there's a lot of talks about that. Even in my interviews with Ian and with Morgan, we asked about this. I know Mike Preach asked a bunch in his interviews. People tweeted about it nonstop. It was not fun in any circumstance to have to recraft the exact same legendary in a different slot because you couldn't scrap the other one. So it looks like they finally listened to that feedback, and they're going forward with it. So these are at least the preliminary changes that I've seen. I'm just kind of, breezing through Wowhead here as things are updated. But this is all great and dandy. And one other one here, we're also getting Legion time walking in 9.1.5, including Mythic Plus dungeons. So a little note to be able to revisit old content, something that people in general have asked for, being able to make old raids or old dungeons relevant, not necessarily under the Mythic Plus system, but, have those be relevant. So, on paper, this is all great, right? It's stuff that at least the majority of people have been asking about or complaining about, or most people just either don't care because they're happy one way or another. Not to ignore the fact that there definitely are people who do enjoy. I mean, I've seen it firsthand. We had a discussion a ton in my stream over the months leading into Shadowlands, etc. there are people who did enjoy the RP element and the forced decision of covenant swapping, etc. So, it's not fair to say that literally everybody was against it, but there was definitely a very large spoken, probably majority of people who were not very happy with it. So, I guess kind of what I wanted to talk about was my feelings towards it. And it seems to resonate pretty well with a lot of the communities and different content creators as well. Generally, when these things happen, and traditionally they've happened a lot, right? I'm I'm no stranger to WoW. Been here for 16 years as well. Um, it's always been interesting, and I tweeted about this earlier, for me to see people's reactions when these QOL changes finally come into place, because there's always a pretty big divide of, oh, thank you so much, you guys are the best, versus, oh my God, why did it take so long? We gave you feedback about this a year ago, 6 months ago, 2 years ago, whatever it may have been. And I find that as the expansions have gone on, there's been potentially a bit more of an increase in the people who are a little cynical and jaded, frankly, including myself to a certain extent, versus people who are just like, oh, you're the best, Blizzard, this is great. There is obviously a world where you can have both. You can criticize and chastise a bit while still simultaneously being happy that the changes are here. I think that's perfectly normal. I would say probably I'm in that boat right now. But what's interesting to dive into is, like, why now, right? Like, why did it take a year? In Legion launch was overall a great expansion, but Legion launch was not great. 7.1 for Legion was very good. They addressed a lot of the issues, especially with bad luck protection, etc. 7.3 as well. Finally, target your legendary, buy the legendary you want, something that people asked for the entire expansion. BFA with its issues, finally QOL changes came in, 8.2 and then 8.3. After tons and tons of preliminary feedback before the systems went live. Tons of feedback when they were finally live, and then they released them and everyone's like, hooray, finally, versus people who are like, hey man, we asked about this like ages ago. Now there's I don't want to be naive. To a certain extent, there are people who go a bit excessively, my cat's going nuts, a bit excessively in one direction, right? They just kind of want to see Blizzard fail. A lot of these people don't even play the game anymore. But it's just kind of like they got out of a bad relationship, one-sided relationship, and they can't help but every small misstep that Blizzard has, they want to dunk on it. They want to be negative about it. So I think there are a lot of people that fuel the fire with negativity where it's not like really warranted anymore, or at least as warranted. Maybe it is warranted in some ways. But that being said, outside of that, I do think that it is fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. Kind of thing is, it's warranted, right? If you get burned once in Legion, let's say with the legendary stuff you asked for so long, you're like, okay, fine, I get it. Then it happens again in BFA a few times. Then it happens, in Shadowlands, people are very proactive. I know Mike, a lot of people, Zach, Bellular, like Towley, like a ton of people that I know in the space were very critical, like, hey, these systems are going to have a problem. Hey, Torghast is going to have this problem. Covenants are going to have this problem. Conduit energy, blah, blah, blah. It's not that all of these people, myself included, know better than the developers and we're better developers than anything like that. But it's just, given the track record of what's happened and how it's happened, and ultimately the revelation and the epiphany of when they finally make the change, their blue post reasoning as to why they finally changed it is often accompanied by, you guys were right, we should have listened, we'll do better in the future. And then the future kind of happens again, and then you're like, well, okay, well, you said that the first time, and the second time, and the third time, and the fourth time. So I understand why people get jaded and a bit pissed off about this, and I'm a bit jaded myself now, ironically, because I'm usually a very positive person, and I'm very like modest and chilled out and stuff. But it is a bit annoying to see that they just take so long to do this stuff. I am happy that the changes are in. I just don't know why it took so long. And I want to kind of dive into, they even gave some reasoning in their blue post for some of these changes. Let me just pull it up right here. In their reasoning for the three, at least, main sections that we talked about, free covenant swaps, no more conduit energy, and alts get to skip the story. They did state here, and I'll read it out just for posterity right now. While we hope many players will be pleased at the increased accessibility and freedom for experimentation these changes will permit, we know that you might be wondering why we didn't make adjustments like this sooner. After all, a large portion of the community has been vocal about wanting to see changes along these lines since mid-2020, when Shadowlands was still in beta. So, they recognize that this is obviously a thing. When it comes to the limitations of the Covenant switching, millions of players experience Shadowlands for the first time through the lens of the Covenant of choice. And that would not have been possible had the choice carried less weight from the outset. Nevertheless, after the conclusion of the Chains of Domination campaign, the Covenants are united against the Jailer, revisiting player feedback, and that context has led us to reevaluate our approach. In terms of the day-to-day player experience, the advantages of rigid division between Covenants have diminished since Shadowlands' launch, while the downsides, feeling disadvantaged in certain types of content or having to choose between mechanical advantages and aesthetics, have only grown. The balance of factors no longer justifies the original limitations on Covenant switching, so in 9.1.5, we're looking to provide a way to circumvent them. Conduit energy. For Conduit energy, however, it is a different story. The system simply did not play out the way we hoped. We should have heeded community feedback and taken a different direction from a year ago. A majority of players largely ignore the system and are unaffected by it, while the minority want to engage in multiple content types, competitively feel constrained by it. Overall, this adds up to a negative experience. Conduit energy isn't really making the game better in any appreciable way, so we're removing the system entirely. And finally, as for the Covenant campaign skip for alts and the ability to freely swap Covenants on alts, that change is one outgrowth of many ongoing discussions within the development team, focused on feedback that at times players feel that the WoW content they most enjoy is locked behind experiences that aren't nearly as appealing to them. Some of the feedback revolves around different playstyles and different content types, but a consistent theme is that experiences that were fun in the first time start to lose their luster on repeat playthrough on alts. Really. Especially when required for power progression. So, just as the Threads of Fate system allows players to skip the level up narrative in subsequent playthroughs, which is great, we want to give max level players a similar option to avoid having to replay a Covenant campaign they've already done. As the 9.1.5 PTR progresses, we hope to roll out several other changes, etc., like I said, such as legendary recycling, maw, intro skip, etc. A couple of things here. This is what's always been very interesting to me, right? And I mentioned it earlier. It's the community reaction. When you read this, you can be in the middle of what I'm about to say, but generally you're either going to be very happy reading this, thank you, or you're going to be very like, why did this take a year? Why did this take a year and a half? We gave you feedback. You did this in BFA. You did this in Legion. So regardless what side of the fence you're on, you're going to be either optimistic or cynical. Oh, I believe these changes. I believe why they're doing them, etc. Or you're going to say, why did it take so long? We gave feedback about this guy, this gal. They gave feedback. You didn't listen, etc., etc. And then ultimately what this ends up doing is the community lights itself on fire as well, and people argue with each other about, who's a Blizzard suck up and shill, and who's anti-Blizzard and too much hatred and whatever. And I mean, the pendulum has to lie somewhere in the middle. It's important. In my opinion, I've always been somebody that I think is important to give stern, constructive criticism, but don't, beat a dead horse kind of thing. There's no point childishly raging about it and like trying to dunk on Blizzard all the time. It's, you give your feedback, you give it several times, and then that's it. If it just doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you, and you take that and you go, and maybe you come back if things change. That's up to you. The timing of all of this is a bit of an eyebrow raise for me. It's come at a time right now. It's come at a time right now when, well, WoW is probably not in the most attractive state to a lot of people. Let's put it that way. There's been obviously a lot of videos from like Bellular and Zach Asmongold, and just a lot of people looking over, constantly hawkeyeing metrics and subscriber count, etc. It seems to potentially not be in the best place. There's not much to hold people's attention unless you're very obsessed with some of the endgame systems like pushing M+ or high-end PvP. So, suffice it to say, WoW itself, not in a great position, not in the most lively position, to put it, compared to what it's been in the past. And obviously there's the whole mess with various lawsuits, a lot of issues with Activision Blizzard at the moment that have turned people off of the company in general, and boycotting their products, don't want to play their products, etc. Don't want to involve themselves with that whole mess right now. So when it rains it pours kind of thing. It's not a great situation. On top of it, Final Fantasy XIV is having a huge surge right now. A lot of players have been interested in it. It's got a lot of great things. It's got some not great things too. What video game doesn't, right? But it does have a lot of great things that I think complement some of the areas that are lacking in WoW, and I'll get into that in another video with my reactions to, like, my first reactions to ARR. That'll launch in later this week probably. But FF14 kind of complements a lot of the things that are lacking in WoW. A lot of that freedom of choice and do whatever you want, and one character can play all the classes and all the professions and all that kind of stuff. So it seems to me, and again, this is one of those, are you optimistic, are you pessimistic, are you cynical, whatever. It seems to me that a lot of these changes I don't fully believe have been in the works for a long time, because Conduit Energy didn't take a long time to realize that it wasn't working. They stated in several interviews that Conduit Energy wasn't working, but it still took them so long to finally just get rid of it. I mean, they jumped through every hoop to try and make it work, and it just wasn't worth it. Everyone knew that it just didn't bring any excellent system or choice or whatever to the game, regardless if they reduced the cooldown or made you gain it a bit more frequently or whatever. And the explanation on covenants and the free swap on covenants now, another thing targeted at accessibility and freedom of choice. If we're truly to follow the narrative of the covenants coming together to fight a common cause, then this should have happened in 9.1, right? Like, that's when people were talking about it. So I don't doubt for a second that they did talk about it for a long time. It was not an easy decision to make, and finally they pulled the ripcord, so to speak, on this. But I don't really believe that it was completely proactive. I do think a lot of these changes were reactive to the current state of WoW, and people unsubbing or going to play different games or just taking a break. Maybe they return, maybe they don't. I mean, for myself, I'm just literally raid logging right now. Like, that's all I'm doing with the BDGG boys. I love raiding with them. I always love raiding in WoW. That's always going to be a huge pillar for me, so that's great. But it's everyone has their own levels of burnout, and you don't want to completely burn out. But I do feel like a lot of these changes were, they had a big sit down and they're like, okay, listen, a lot of complaints about accessibility, freedom of choice. Players are unsubbing. FF is on the surge. Or even if it's not FF, other players are leaving to other games. We have the issues within the company at the moment. And I think they just had a big sit down and a big epiphany moment. And they're like, I think we just need to be less restrictive about things, finally. Which is why I think we're seeing this just massive, just regurgitation, vomit, finally, of we want you to have easier choices. We want you to not have to make these crazy choices anymore. And it's good. Like, overall, it is a very good thing. Why did it take so long? Blah, blah, blah. We've discussed that already. But I do think it is definitely a bit reactive. Who knows? What would this have happened if the situation with Activision Blizzard wasn't present? If Blizzard, if WoW wasn't in kind of the situation it is, if people weren't, having a surge into Final Fantasy 14, would this have happened? I don't know. I don't know if it would have happened to this level personally, at least based on history in the past, let's say 3 expansions. Obviously, there's been more than 3 expansions, but let's say the past 5-6 years, right? So I do think it is a bit reactive. Nonetheless, does it really matter in the future and in the long run? I mean, to a certain extent, possibly, right? Because, again, pessimism, people have been burned before. They keep saying, we're sorry, we'll listen, we'll do better. And then it happens again. And then it happens again. Is this the last time? I hope so. I always put a lot of faith in these guys and a lot of people that work in the company. I know it ain't easy, man. I have a lot of respect for them, and it's not easy to do. I don't envy their position at all. These are not light changes that, they just kind of sat around 2 people and they're like, yeah, you know what, let's get rid of covenant restrictions and Conduit Energy. This is probably like a big decision they had to do. So hopefully, moving forward, I think the best thing is just like, we just need better. Like, communication is as good as we can do. People keep saying we need better communication. I don't think the player base can communicate to a certain extent any better with the tools that we have. Like, we really can't, right? We have Twitter, we have direct dev interviews that I do, that Mike does, that a lot of people do. We have so many different outlets. I think the better communication needs to come from the development side, akin to, you know, water dev coolers that they used to back in the day, whatever it may be. I think players just want to understand the thought process and reasoning, unfiltered, behind why perhaps they're a bit stubborn with their decisions sometimes, and why they take so long to make certain changes, rather than they're a bit quiet about it, they keep defending it, and then a year and a half later they go, you know what, we should have listened to you. Let's just sweep this under the rug and move on. I think communication goes a long way, along the way, and that way at least it's out in the open and there's an open dialogue. And if people don't like the direction it's headed, at least they know why. They go, okay, well, listen, these are their thought process. I've given my feedback. It doesn't align with them. They don't want to change it. I got it. Let's move on. And this goes for stuff like class changes and balance too. Just in general, I think people would appreciate better feedback from dev side. A kind of jump into the thought process or the reasoning behind a design choice, like a major design choice or a major class design choice or whatever. Yeah, sorry, this was a bit rambly, so sorry about that. Like I said, I just wanted to do kind of a raw take on thing. One last thing I do want to mention, though, a couple of things I want to mention as we kind of zoom out of here. I would say the biggest thing for me, or a couple of the biggest things for me are, I have had and still continue to have a lot of faith in the WoW dev team. Like I said, I know a lot of the guys there, and I know some of you are immediately going to go, oh, shill, whatever. Man, don't do that. Like, it's like people are so easy. Like, unless you just completely negative dunk on the game, you're immediately a shill. That's just not how it works, man. Like, I barely play the game right now except for raid logging. I've given tons of criticism. A lot of people give criticism. There's just a difference between rage culture and, like, completely flaming and just being like a child about things, and just, like being critical, leaving it at the door, challenging things like I do with my interviews with them. And then if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Just leave, right? I'm saying to myself, like, just leave. Like I have, like, I come back for raid. That's it. I'm gone. Raid. I'm gone. Raid. I'm gone. So, I have respect for them, and I understand that it's tough, but over time, I personally can't help but have become cynical too. And I think it's totally justified for people to feel like that, not because we're like evil people or something like that, but just because it's perfectly normal for human emotion and human mindset to go that way if something keeps doing you dirty, right? Like, it makes sense. If you, this is the, fourth, fifth-ish time this has happened of, like, we told you, hey, we should have listened, sorry, we'll do better in the future, and they don't. So it completely makes sense that people are jaded about it. And everybody's mileage varies in terms of how much you tolerate and how okay you are with it. So that's one thing I wanted to say. The second thing, perhaps a bit more on the cynical side of things, is that these are great changes, right? I mean, these are just objectively good things. Can't say objectively. Some people may not like them, but I think these are overall very good changes. But the biggest thing to note for me is that, a little cynical here, a little negative, but these aren't changes that are really going to get me playing the game again more than I am for a raid logging. Obviously, everyone's going to differ with their opinion about what I just said. Some people will play more now because, hey, I can swap between raid and plus covenants easily, whatever it may be. But these, to me, don't really address things like stale content or lack of content or issues with reward systems or whatever. I think that they set up a good skeleton for the future of that kind of stuff, but I don't think that it's not like a brand new raid just launched and all this stuff. I think it sets up a good precedence. I think it's really good steps in order to have a potentially blow you out of the water, amazing 9.2, new raid, etc. coming up. But these don't, to me, address, like, a lot of the issues with M+ right now, or, well, I don't really PvP much, but I'm sure issues with PvP that people have, or, Korthia, and, like, that got stale really quickly for people. So I'm glad to see that the changes are here. I think that these will have a really good foundation and groundwork in order to then provide better content that people can enjoy as they wish, rather than forced and pigeonholed in one way or another via covenant choice or conduit energy, whatever it may be. or really needing to farm legendary, Soul Ash and Soul Cinders to death and getting sick of Torghast, which I hope also improves. But yeah, I don't know. I didn't really want to leave on a particularly negative note. I do think these changes are great, but for me at least, they don't really do anything about the content or scream at me that immediately I want to come back and swap to Kyrian for a 1 M+ dungeon. M+ is still M+ at the end of the day. Raid is still raid. PvP is still PvP. So the most hopeful thing for me is that, like I said, this is good groundwork, good foundation to then make some excellent additions to content and content changes. Would in combination with these systems, could be a really big thing. So, holding out for it. Hopefully it's going to be an amazing 9.2. We've definitely seen a lot of turnaround patches in the previous expansions that have done a lot of good stuff. So let's keep our chin up on this one and hope it turns out well. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Appreciate it. Like I said, I know it was a bit rambly. I know, usually we do a very scripted video and a lot of jokes and cuts and edits in there. And obviously there's going to be some edits in here too. Just raw initial thoughts on this. I probably already missed a couple of things because I'm just, I made a couple little notes on my screen here and I just wanted to ramble about it a bit. So if you watched, I appreciate it. Definitely curious to hear your thoughts about this, because this, unlike other videos where I'm, memeing about systems or criticizing or scripting things, this is definitely just a big open community discussion. So definitely curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this. If you want to dunk on Blizzard, do what you got to do. If you want to be positive, be positive. But I am curious to hear, just akin to my feelings about, it's not enough to bring me back outside of just raiding, or I can't wait to resub now because of this. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. So leave your thoughts down in the messages. I do read them. I do read all of them. Hit some comments. Curious to see what you guys think. Thanks a lot for watching. And I guess our next video will be FF14 AR stuff. So I'll see you guys in a few days for that.